This took place during the autumn of 2021, when I was living on my own for the first time in a rental townhouse located in southern Illinois. Even though I was 27, had a steady full-time job and followed a routine, I still felt uneasy about living alone. I had just gone through a tough breakup, and I hoped that the quiet and solitude would help me sort things out emotionally. The townhouse was one of several nearly identical units in a small row. It wasn't anything special, simple, tidy, and peaceful, tucked at the end of a quiet cul-de-sac just off a rural highway. The area had that typical suburban atmosphere: beige vinyl siding, neatly clipped bushes, wind chimes dangling from porches, and family names painted on mailboxes. Most of the residents were older, though there were a few younger households. I didn't really speak to any of them, which suited me. I liked keeping to myself. But right away, one particular neighbor stood out. He lived 3 units down from mine. A tall, broad man in his mid-40s with a rough beard and a strange habit of being outside late at night. Sometimes he would pace or smoke. Other times he'd simply stand there, doing absolutely nothing, just watching. When I'd pull into my driveway after work around 9 or 10 p.m., I'd see him either leaning on his porch railing or standing still near his driveway facing the road. He never acknowledged me, not a wave or a smile, just stared, even if I made direct eye contact. I tried to disregard it. I mentioned it to a few friends and to my mom, and they suggested maybe he was a night owl or had trouble sleeping. Still, there was something off-putting about him. It wasn't just his presence. It was how still he was. He didn't shift around, fidget, or check his phone. He just stood there, completely motionless. The longer I lived there, the more that uneasy feeling in my stomach grew. Then the sounds began. It was mid-September when I heard the first one. I'd just come home from a long shift at my job managing inventory at a distribution warehouse. My usual routine had me home around 10:30 p.m., grabbing a quick snack and heading to bed. That night, I fell asleep around midnight. At exactly 2:37 a.m., I woke to a noise that sounded like metal scraping against wood. At first, I thought it had been part of a dream. But then I heard it again, a slow, drawn-out, creaking sound, like a rusty gate being opened. My bedroom was on the ground floor in the back of the unit, with a sliding glass door that opened into a small fenced-in backyard. I had vertical blinds covering the door. I sat up in bed, heart pounding, and listened. There was a pause. Then I heard footsteps, quiet, deliberate crunching sounds, as if someone was slowly walking on gravel. The yard didn't have grass, just decorative stones, so each step was clearly audible. This wasn't a small animal. I picked up my phone and got out of bed. I didn't have any kind of real weapon, just a dull kitchen knife I kept in the nightstand as a precaution, which felt pretty ridiculous at the time. I crouched near the window and peeked through the blinds. I couldn't see anything. The motion light was still off, which made me think they were either out of its range or had come in another way. I dialed 911. The dispatcher remained calm, took down my address, and said officers were on their way. I stayed hunched in the dark, barely breathing. Roughly 10 minutes later, red and blue lights flashed across my front window. I stood up, opened the door, and met the officers outside. I told them everything, what I heard and what time it happened. One officer circled around to the back while the others stayed with me and asked a few questions. The one who checked the yard came back and said the gate was closed and there was no sign of forced entry. He said he'd file a report just in case. They didn't find anything, no damage, no footprints. One of them actually said, "Might have just been a raccoon," and gave me a look like I'd wasted their time. I didn't argue. They left about 10 minutes later. I didn't sleep at all that night. The next morning, I went outside to examine the backyard myself. That's when I spotted something odd. A flat stone, roughly the size of a small book, had been wedged beneath the bottom of the wooden gate. I hadn't seen it there before. The gate had a strong spring that made it swing shut on its own, but the rock had clearly been placed there to keep it slightly open. It wasn't obvious, but it looked intentional, like someone was trying to quietly re-enter later. I picked up the stone and threw it into the yard. I called the police again and explained what I had found. They said they'd make a note of it in the report, but repeated that there wasn't much they could do. I asked if they could check with the neighbors or look for security footage. They said unless an actual crime occurred, they couldn't pursue it. I felt like I was losing my grip on reality. 2 nights later, things escalated. At exactly 2:14 a.m., I woke up to the sound of my back door handle being turned. At first, it was a soft rattle, like someone gently testing the lock. Then it got more forceful, as if someone was trying to open it. I sat up in bed, heart racing. I couldn't see anything through the blinds, but I had this overwhelming sense that someone was just on the other side of the glass. My mouth was dry. My hands shook as I picked up the phone and called the police again. While waiting, I crouched in the hallway out of sight. I had no gun, no dog, just that useless kitchen knife. The motion light clicked on, and through a gap in the blinds I saw a shadow pass across the door. It was a man. He didn't run or duck away. He just stood there. The same 2 officers returned. This time they did find something. Large footprints in the gravel right up to the door. But once again, since no one had entered and there was no sign of damage, there was little they could do. They said they'd increase patrols and reminded me to keep everything locked. The next day, I set up a camera system. I bought a mid-range Wi-Fi setup and installed one camera above the back door and another above the front porch. That night, I didn't sleep. I sat in the dark living room watching the live footage on my phone. 2:14 a.m. passed without incident. But at 2:23, the back camera was triggered. A man entered the frame. He came through the gate like he knew exactly where to move to avoid setting off the sensor until the last second. He was tall and wide, dressed in a black hoodie with the hood up, jeans and gloves. He walked right up to the glass door, looked straight into the camera, and smiled. It was a slow, deliberate grin. Then he stepped back, eyes still locked on the lens, and vanished into the darkness. I called the police again. They returned, watched the footage, and admitted it was disturbing. But since there had been no forced entry, no apparent weapon, and no destruction of property, they claimed they were still unable to act. I begged them to check with the neighbors for additional footage. They said they couldn't. That night, I packed a bag and stayed in a hotel. The following day, when I returned to grab more of my things, I found 4 muddy handprints smeared across the glass door. 2 were high up, 2 lower down, like someone had crouched and pressed their hands against the glass for a while, watching. I moved out within a week. I broke my lease and gave up my security deposit. I didn't care. I couldn't spend another night in that place. The last straw was a note I found stuck inside my mailbox the day I moved out. It was handwritten on lined notebook paper in cramped, uneven lettering. It said, "The cops leave, but I don't." I filed one final report. The officer I spoke with that time seemed genuinely unsettled by the note. He promised they'd do a wellness check in the neighborhood, but by then it didn't matter. I was gone. Roughly a month later, I received a Facebook message from someone named Kayla. She said she had recently moved into my old unit. Her message read, "Hey, sorry to message you. I think you used to live here? Did you ever see a guy in a black hoodie near the backyard? I keep hearing footsteps at night. Last night someone knocked on the glass around 2 a.m. and just stood there." I never answered. I didn't want to know how the rest of her story went.